Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm David Cobb. I am the Redneck, and you bet I've gone green. And through the course of this conversation, I hope you will too. I want to remind you that we are coming at you right now live on both YouTube and now Rumble, that we'll be having more platforms join us. If you are watching live, welcome. You can join the conversation by making a comment into YouTube, and we ask you to do that. We'll also ask you if you're on Substack to make sure, whether it's email or podcast, wherever you get it, please like, comment, and subscribe, because we know how the algorithm works. I know you do too, but this is the point. Conversation like this is unsanctioned by the corporate leaders and predatory class, but we're going to break that algorithm. We're going to come to you and have honest conversation. Do want to remind you that at Redneck Gone Green, the whole purpose of this show is to go beyond that ain't it awful. I think that everybody who's watching this already understands white supremacy, predatory capitalism, settler colonialism, heteropatriarchy are all awful. And as if that's not bad enough, these a-holes who run the world are literally destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. But the other point is, this show exists because there is something to be done. And yes, that is a hat nod to Vladimir Lenin and his famous essay, What is to be Done? And it's in that spirit that I want to bring a fantastic journalist into this conversation. Our next guest, and who will be joining us now, is Margaret Kimberly. Margaret is the executive editor and senior columnist of Black Agenda Report. She's also the current host of the Black Agenda Radio. Her new book, Presidential, Black America and the Presidents, was published by Steerforth Press. Dr. Cornel West said, and I quote, "Margaret Kimberly gives us an intellectual gem of prophetic fire about all the U.S. presidents and their deep roots in the vicious legacy of white supremacy and predatory capitalism. Such truths seem more than most Americans can bear, though we ignore her words at our own peril." End quote. I also want to acknowledge that Margaret Kimberly is a comrade and a personal friend, and I am so very grateful for you to join us. Welcome to the conversation, Margaret Kimberly. Margaret, you are muted, I'm afraid.
I'll start over. Hi there. It's a pleasure to be on this brand new show. I can look back and say I was one of the first guests on Redneck Gone Green.
You may certainly say that. And I got to say, Margaret, that you and I have the great privilege of having worked together for decades now, right? So I do want to take a moment for our viewers and listeners to understand just what Black Agenda Report is, because I really do like, and this is, our dear departed Glenn, but also Bruce. I want to turn it over to you to talk about what Black Agenda Report is and why folks should be cross-pollinating on Redneck Gone Green and the Black Agenda Report.
Well, we founded Black Agenda Report in 2006. As you said, they both passed away now. It's very sad. Bruce Dixon and Glenn Ford and myself. Glenn, they both left us in the last few years, 3 years ago, and 4 years ago and 2 years ago. And in 2006, we left another publication called Black Commentator for a variety of reasons. But our tagline says it all. We say news and analysis from a Black left perspective. And it's very Black and very left. And, the word left is misused so much in this country. All kinds of, scoundrelly people get to call themselves left, capitalists and bought off Congress members and all sorts of people get to call themselves left. But there's no mistaking at Black Agenda Report that we are anti-imperialist, that we are anti-capitalist, that we are socialists. Glenn and Bruce were longtime Marxists, and both of them were Black Panther party members. Bruce was also a longtime member of the Green Party. He was the first person I had personal contact with that was a Green. So I think we can thank Bruce for having brought us together in that way. But we have been going strong since, I can't believe it's 17 years now. We started in October of 2006. And taking seriously journalism, the old saw about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. That is our role, to be the truth tellers, to analyze the news and from a left perspective, and always having the needs of Black people all over the world, the entire African diaspora, foremost in our thoughts. And, as such, we have always been very sharp in our critique of US politics, of the duopoly system and the phony, and it's just a phony democracy. I find it interesting, although I guess it's not shocking, that as the system devolves, the word democracy is used more and more. People talk about democracy all the time. Well, we have elections and we have all these political bodies, but we don't have rule of the people. The people get the opposite of what they want. And we the anniversary of Glenn's passing was recently, and so we've been reprinting some of his work, some of his broadcasts, and he made the point that Democrats and Republicans are not political parties. They everything's upside down. They don't serve the interest of their members. That's what a true political party is supposed to do, right? And we don't have that. So we are still talking about Bruce Dixon. He coined a couple of phrases. He was one of the first people to call, maybe the first person to call Bernie Sanders a sheepdog, and to point out that his role was to sheepdog, to herd left-leaning Democrats back into the Democratic Party. He also gave us the term the Black misleadership class, the petty bourgeoisie of the Congressional Black Caucus and other organizations who are a well-paid buffer class, but who serve the interests not of Black people, but of those people we should be opposing. We publish every week. Tomorrow, in fact, Wednesdays, blackagendareport.com. We have articles, book reviews, commentary. We have our Black Agenda Radio podcast interviews on Fridays. And we're of course we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, so people can find us anywhere. We have I have a great team, editorial team. We work very closely together to make sure that we continue this legacy, at this very, I mean, every moment seems critical, but I guess every year seems a little more critical. And it's all exposed. We're about to go through a presidential election year, which we're talking about, but that is an opportunity for the scoundrels to do their work and to attack Cornel West, attack anybody. And as I was saying, they don't represent the people, so they're wagging their finger and blaming voters already. It's like, well, Joe Biden will lose if Cornel West runs. So we see all of these things coming to a head. The hottest month in recorded history that we've just been through. And two political parties who, well, Republicans don't pretend, but Democrats pretend that they're going to save us from the same fossil fuel companies that give them so much help. War in Ukraine, imperialism around the world, U.S. declining as a power, but becoming more dangerous even as it declines. And those are the sorts of things that we report on.
And thank you, Margaret. So welcome, folks who are joining. I see that more and more folks are joining us live, which makes me happy. I want to say, give a special howdy to Catherine, who I will say is one of the very first financial sponsors of Redneck Gone Green, as well as a shout out and a thank you to Carolyn for joining us, to helping us make sure that we're able to bring this show to you. Also want to welcome Steve and One Human, who have already dropped some notes into the chat. And I want to underscore, Margaret, the clarity with which you described the idea of democracy. Like,
Mhm.
I want to remind viewers and listeners, the word democracy comes from the Attic Greek, and it just means, if you break it down, demos, the people, kratia, rule or power. So literally the word democracy means the people rule or the people have the power. So a pop quiz, does anybody really believe that ordinary people are ruling in this country? I mean, of course not. Like, it's a farce. It is, as you say, Disneyland democracy,
Mhm.
where we are given the choice of choosing between two corporately filtered candidates of the two corporately sponsored parties. And are there differences? Of course, there are differences between Democrats and Republicans. But let's be clear about what they agree on. They agree on U.S. empire and hegemony. They agree on a basic capitalist orientation where a small elite will actually control the means of production. They have so much agreement about the broad structure of how society is going to operate. And then they give us distinctions that matter, to be sure. But at the end of the day, power is never ceded to the people. And that's why I want to have a conversation about Cornel West, Margaret, because like I happen to know something that others may not know, and that is you literally broke the story that Cornel West had shifted from the People's Party to the Green Party. You were like literally the very first journalist to be able to report on that. So I'm going to back up a moment and ask you to, because you are part of the Green Eco Socialist Network that has just endorsed Cornel West for president. You're also a journalist, but a people's journalist. So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about why you are excited on a personal level and as a revolutionary. Why are you, Margaret Kimberly, excited about Cornel West?
Well, I'm I try to, it's the reasons we're told to be excited about presidential elections don't matter to any one of our ilk. But to have a thought leader, a clergyman, a writer, an activist like Cornel West to run for the Green Party nomination is, I think it's a shot in the arm to the left in general. I think it's a shot in the arm to the Green Party to have a Black candidate also who is a recognized leader, a respected person for so many decades. Um, I think I think also it's important to build the left, to build the Green Party in this case, and to make the case to stop supporting the duopoly. All of these scare tactics have to be ignored. What do we get when you get a Democrat? So, what are we being told? Biden has to win. Remember, we were told Biden was harm reduction. Remember that? Biden is harm reduction, not to the railroad workers. He broke their strike and then has the nerve to say, I'm the union president. Um, Remember, Trump was going to get us all killed. He would start World War III. Well, now they're in this proxy war in Ukraine, refusing to talk. Um, uh, Biden literally cannot get the president of China to take his phone calls, can't get Xi Jinping on the phone. And to be told this is the best we can do, this is the best we can have, and that this has to continue and that you have no other option except to keep doing to keep following these failures of the people. And it's something that's not discussed enough in this country. How many people are struggling, are suffering? Even working people, there are working people who are unhoused, working people who live in the shelter system, who qualify for food stamps and Medicaid, although they're being kicked off now. Nobody wants to talk about that now that the COVID emergency has been declared over. Millions, I'm not exaggerating, millions of people have lost benefits that they're entitled to. And that is something that the Democrats and Republicans do not talk about. Joe Biden has, to my knowledge, never given a speech about homelessness. Never.
And let's be clear about something, friends. There are more empty houses in the US than there are houseless people. And that is true in every state in the union and in every community. And the ratio of how many empty houses is obscene. The point is, the crisis of houselessness is not a crisis of not having enough houses.
No.
It is a crisis of capitalism. Is it a crisis of treating houses like a commodity to be bought and paid for at a profit? The same is true about healthcare. The same is true about education. Let's be clear about something. The system is not broken. The system is operating exactly as it's designed to operate, which is to treat human needs as commodities to be bought and paid for at a profit. There is no solution within the capitalist framework for ensuring that all human needs are met. That's why you'll hear Margaret Kimberly and I unabashedly talking about the need to be post-capitalist, anti-capitalist. We need a completely new economic system. Now, to be clear, when I go into a pool hall or a bowling alley, and like any good redneck, I do go into pool halls and bowling alleys, I don't typically use the same kind of language that you hear me use on this live stream, because I know as a communicator, I've got to talk to the people in the language that they understand. But make no mistake about it, I can have this same conversation using ordinary language, and it goes something like this. Don't you think the boss man's got his boot on our neck? Don't you think that you've got more in common with other working class Black folks than you do with Donald Trump? See, I can have these kind of conversations. So I just want to say, one of the things that I appreciate about Margaret Kimberly and the Black Agenda Report is the clarity that they have around what being a leftist means without falling into jargon. I'm also going to take an opportunity to say welcome to David Schwartzman, a dear friend
Hi,
and
David.
comrade who's just joining us. David Schwartzman expresses delight that the Green Eco Socialist Network has endorsed Cornel West. And David Wilcox has joined in to say, looking forward to petitioning for Cornell next spring. So already the excitement about this campaign is undergoing. I also want to say a word or two, right? Because if for folks who may not know, Cornel West is truly a genuine visionary who has spent his entire life speaking courageously and plainly about white supremacy, settler colonialism, capitalism, and heteropatriarchy. His commitment to justice has been unwavering. He has firmly, clearly talked about the inherent dignity of every individual. He has a distinguished career as an educator, a philosopher, a social change agent, a public intellectual. He has fearlessly spoken out against the social and economic injustices that Margaret has pointed out that Joe Biden and any neoliberal Democrat has never talked about. Because that's the one thing, I'll give Bernie Sanders credit for this. He was willing to talk about those issues. Now, I think he was making a mistake by staying within the Democratic Party, but to be sure, there is something happening. The Democratic Party is losing its hold over ordinary people, and I say, bring it on. Push those contradictions. We have to expose the Democratic Party leadership for what it is, and be clear, rank and file members of the Democratic Party are infinitely more progressive and left than the leadership of the Democratic Party. So I'm going to now shift gears for a moment, Margaret, because Cornel West, and I encourage, and thank you, Steve Welter, for this. Steve Welter says in the comments, running Cornel West, the Greens could get 5% of the vote, which would be a huge breakthrough. Completely agree with you, Steve. I'm very excited about this. I got to tell you, I think that Cornel West has the opportunity to be the next Nader 2000 campaign, right? It could literally animate and inspire a whole new group of folks. Margaret, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share, here is the list of things that it took so-called alternative political parties, what some people call third parties, but I'm going to say alternative political parties. This is what it took alternative political parties to champion at the ballot box. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
The abolition of slavery, women getting the ability to cast a vote, the creation of the Social Security Administration, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation laws, pure food and drug laws, ending child labor, the ability for voters to actually elect their representatives to the United States Senate. For goodness sakes, y'all, the entire fabric of what we today would consider the bare damn minimum, I mean, the floor for what could be considered a decent society, that fabric was literally woven together, strand by strand, by third-party activists who did their work when they were called naive and unrealistic, who did their work when they were called dangerous un-Americans, and who did their work when they were called spoilers. So I posit that today, if we want to live in, not just talk about, but actually live in a world that will end war as foreign policy, if we want to talk about a world where we will guarantee access to housing and education and healthcare as fundamental human rights, if we want to live in a world that will dismantle the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the entire neoliberal hegemonic apparatus that has created this corporate global empire. See, if we want to live in that world, we're going to have the courage to engage in authentic electoral politics. So I'm going to stop and ask Margaret, how's this landing for you? Like, any comments, reflections?
Well, I agree with, of course, with everything that you just said. And as far as being spoilers, this system needs to be spoiled. I'm gonna own it. This idea that these scoundrels are gonna be our saviors is, the always harm reduction. It's like, no, no, they're not. And they actually, and we see that. We see millions of people voting, especially in presidential elections, but we see millions of people not bothering at all because they know their interests aren't being represented. Their interests aren't being discussed. Um, and so we see this apathy. And I came from a family where I was always told it was important to vote. You have to vote. You have to vote, especially for Black people. People struggled so hard to vote. And all of that is true. But I don't think those people struggled to end up with this. I don't know, what do we have now? A kleptocracy? I don't know what kind of ocracy it is. It's not a democracy, that's for sure. So people struggled to have justice. People struggled to have a system that would meet their needs at least some of the time. So that just falls flat for me, that you have an obligation to keep the Democrats in office when they do the opposite of what their people want them to do. And it's so interesting to me when I think of all the things that people can imagine. There are people who believe in aliens. I happen not to, or any number of things that could be called fanciful, maybe visionary, I suppose will be positive and say that. But the idea of imagining a different political system, the idea of imagining a different economic system is something we're not supposed to do. We're
Right.
actually told not to think about anything else. This is it. This is all you've got. And excuse me, this striving to be better and different is something that is actively discouraged. And it discourages people, all right. And unfortunately, in local elections, local and state elections, the turnout is always very low, which actually is where people need to pay more attention than they do, quite frankly. But it's why we need a Green Party. It's why we need a strong candidate like Cornel West, so that people can hear someone say, someone they respect, someone whom they know, say that the U.S. needs to cut its military budget at least in half. I mean, I'm sure it could be more than that. I know he was interviewed by Anderson Cooper, who just seemed to be, annoyed that he dared to run and tried to tell him he should say, Vladimir Putin is, um, the worst person ever. But you never see anti-war people on corporate media ever. I mean, like never, never.
Right.
They don't even, like somebody who's a little too leftish. They're xed out. This is an opportunity for the voices of millions of people to be heard, to be represented,
And
because
Margaret,
we get the opposite of that.
I'm going to circle back because I loved how you were talking. Look, to be clear, like Black folks and people of color fought, struggled, died for the ability to vote, right? Like, and there's a reason that the ruling elite fight so hard. And I correct myself. I have to remind myself not to call them the elite. They're not better than us. The predatory class, the small oligarchic kleptocracy, the predatory class have always used the ability or the vote and done their best to prevent elections from being meaningful, right?
Hmm.
So I and you and I, Margaret, believe in voting. We believe
Yeah,
in
yeah.
using it, but we're also not electoral fetishist. We have no illusion that voting alone is going to bring us into the world that we want. And I also want to say this: if you, like me and Margaret, believe that we want to transform society and that we need, and in fact, not only need to, but we have to, because of the global climate catastrophe, because of rising fascism, like if you hold with conviction that we need to change this system, I tell people all the time, if you want to change this system and all you ever do is vote, then you're really wasting your time. Like voting alone is not going to get us where we need to be. But there's a corollary to that, my friends. If you want to change this system and you have the opportunity to vote for candidates who are calling for transformational change, you're wasting an opportunity. So it's not either or, it's both and. We need to engage, we need to be in the streets, we need to be on podcasts and create our own media. We need to be building cooperatives and we need to be building these things, and we have to engage in electoral politics. None of them alone is it. But I also want to circle back, Margaret, your point about voting. It kind of occurs to me, the Democratic Party, they basically try to take people of color and their votes for granted.
Hmm.
They take women's votes for granted. They take organized labor's votes for granted. They take environmentalist votes for granted. And in electoral politics, if you've been taken for granted, friends, you just got taken. And that's the thing. It's an okey doke. Don't fall for the okey doke. The Democratic Party leadership are not your friends. And I like David Wilcox. David Wilcox just dropped in the comments. In my father's words, democracy is a constant debate, occasionally resulting in a decision, that is the vote. I think it's David Wilcox, your father's got an astute observation on that point. So, Margaret, my question is, like, how do you address people who say, "Oh, like I don't bother to vote at all"? What do you say to them?
Well, I used to used to be shocked and say, "Oh, you have to vote. You have to." Now I say, "I get it. I understand. I know why you don't vote. That it's can seem like an exercise in futility." I do encourage people to vote in local elections. I really do believe that's where we actually get the legislation done that impacts our lives. So I try to tell people, okay, but did you vote in a city council race? Did you vote for your state legislators? They impact your life, and nobody ever argues with that. I notice, because I think it's because people really know that it's true. And but I also urge people to educate themselves. I urge people to be involved in whatever way they can be involved. And sometimes I just agree with them. I say, I get it. I see why you would say that. No shaming. No, it's your fault that Trump won. No, none of that. I would never say anything like that.
Margaret, I thank you for that point too, because I also want to lift up one of the things that I know about you as an individual, you as a journalist, and the Black Agenda Report has been from its inception, 17 years going and still going strong, and that is a commitment to principled struggle and to truth telling. Like that, there is like you and both again Glenn and Bruce, but your entire editorial team I have seen have like real disagreement with folks, but engage it in a principled way. And I think that that's something that is missing in the left today, especially in this country, that we seem to have forgotten that it's actually okay to engage in principled debate. In fact, we should do that. We should sharpen our intellect and our like steel sharpens steel. And this like seeming inability to have honest disagreement, I think is actually part of the problem.
It is. You know what I find I think I was discussing some I can't remember what issue with someone, and I was saying that I think most Americans are brainwashed. Depending on where you stand, you're brainwashed about different things, and liberals are brainwashed to believe that they must defend the Democratic Party. There are certain things they cannot differ with anyone on, and that's that the indoctrination for that group of people instead of understanding, as you point out, the importance, not just that it's okay to engage in struggle and debate and dialogue. It's vital. It's something really necessary because how do you know? How can you stand by what you say if you never test it out? I mean, just on a practical level, does what I say stand up to argument or not? I don't find out if it's the same thing that is just in my head, and I never engage with anyone else or contemplate that maybe there's something I'm missing, or just to say I didn't know that, or to change my mind about something. It is really very. It's absolutely necessary that we do it, and but I see this constant indoctrination. I was over the weekend. I was a captive audience, if you will, at a friend's house who was watching MSNBC, and it was nothing but Trump indictment. I mean, nothing else. Like nothing else was happening in the world. And it was just a propaganda session that if you can't think about anything else, because this orange man is going to come back, that's the way I saw it. There was nothing new. Every program, it's like 3 or 4 programs repeated the same. They had different people talking about how horrible Donald Trump is, which how hard is it to say that Donald Trump is horrible? But it's as if nothing else was happening in the world. There was nothing else to discuss. But if you want to keep people indoctrinated, then you have to keep repeating that, because then you might have people who say, did the minimum wage go up? Did it go up? Do we still have people who are uninsured? Do we have people who are insured and end up with medical debt anyway? I mean, medical debt is such a horrifying term, isn't it? Student loan debt. People my age are getting their Social Security garnished to pay back their student loans. So, so all of these are things that we have to discuss and raise with people. And I find if you do it in a way that's compassionate and respectful, you can get people to start thinking about things they never thought about before, because there's so little to encourage exploration, so little to encourage that thought. The media, who are, the New York Times is, what is it? All the news fit to print. What? That's not the paper of record. New York Times, Washington Post, it's on, I know on foreign policy, it's just like, it reads like a State Department press release. And these are supposed to be the people you have to listen to. So, but I think it helps when you point this out to people, when you say to them, don't you think it's interesting that they have never asked a question about X? Don't you think it's interesting that they never talk about, I don't know, mass incarceration? The US has more people in jail than any other country, while they're wagging their finger and calling someone else a violator of human rights. I think most people are able to have those conversations and to contemplate. And even those of us who are allied with one another, we may differ on strategies or tactics, but that's okay. It's more than okay. It's the bad part is if we don't speak up and discuss where we really fall.
Thank you so much for saying that, because this space, Redneck Gone Green, once a week is going to be a spot where we actually have respectful discourse, including with folks with whom we disagree on tactics. Now, I'm not going to ever bring a fascist on this program, right? Now, having said that, I think it's important, and David Schwartzman, I'm going to get to your comment, I promise you. I want to remind myself, viewers, listeners, Margaret's point, and that is the corporate media is designed to ensure not just that it tells us what to think, but especially what to think about, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason that on the political shows, like it's either, if you tune in to the liberal version, it's all about Trump indictment 24/7. If you turn into the right version of it, it's Hunter Biden and 24/7. But you never hear conversation about like what is the current buying power of an ordinary worker. You just don't hear that ever, right? Okay, so I think that this is important. I also want to shift gears to David Schwartzman. And thank you, David. We're going to have a call-in option coming up soon. But right now, we can at least take your comments for those of you watching live on YouTube. And I do want to actually say that David Schwartzman has said this, and I want you to react to this. Schwartzman says, we should not argue that there is no real difference who wins in 2024. It is imperative that the white supremacist, climate denialist Republican Party be defeated in 2024. Therefore, Cornel West should share in our campaign the consequences of how people vote, depending on their state with respect to its votes in the Electoral College. This will, says Schwartzman, where am I? This will maximize the chances of defeating Trump and Republicans in 2024 and strengthen our eco-socialist Green Party program for struggles ahead, not imperialist agenda. Margaret, I'm going to invite you to reflect and react to David Schwartz's comments in the.
Well, I'm not sure what he meant about. I think it's important for people to know about the Electoral College, because I was a grown person in the 2000 election, and then I realized, wait a minute, I live in a blue state. I can vote for whoever I want. Although I argue in favor of voting whoever you want anyway. So I'm not sure what his point is, aside from that civics lesson we all should have about. Um, the impact that our votes have, depending upon where we live. Um, that gets into a whole other discussion about where Greens should run, and if a state flips, it was the Green Party's fault in 2016. So I'm not sure what his point is, aside from just having that very important information.
Got it. So, David, if you are so inspired, please do continue in the chat to make your point. I also want to say this, like I I would never say that there's not a difference between Democrats and Republicans. Of course, there's a difference. Like having said that, is there a substantive difference? To me, the question of U.S. empire, we have to be very clear. There is no difference on that
That's correct.
topic.
Mhm.
Is there a difference on a woman's right to choose? Absolutely. That difference is an important one, and I would never try to argue that it's not a difference or that it's an important difference. Having said that, It's part of the reason why I engage in elections, but I also build worker-owned cooperatives. I help incubate community land trusts. I work on universal basic income. Because I am a student of Amilcar Cabral, the great African revolutionary and theorist and practitioner. And I love that he said many things worth quoting. Here's one of the things that he said. This is a quote. Always remember that the people are not fighting for ideas. They're not fighting for things in their mind. The people fight and accept the sacrifices that the movement requires in order to gain material advantage, to live better and in peace, to benefit from progress, and to have a better future for their children. And to me, Margaret, that is a constant reminder that we have to both be clear about, yes, we have to have a vision, but does our vision in very practical terms make people's lives better? And if so, how are we doing that? That's the reason why on this program, we're going to continually bring in people to say, well, what is to be done? Now, in elections, I do think elections are a place. We're going to talk about elections. Next week, we're going to bring in Mike Strode of the Cola Nut Collaborative to talk about time banking. And to me, I think it's equally important that we talk about concrete local campaigns, concrete campaigns that people can do outside of the electoral process.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I did one before aside from amplifying what you just said, I do want to go back to what you said about the differences between Democrats and Republicans. The problem now is that the Democrats for years said, we're going to protect a woman's right to choose. And then they didn't. So they say this, um, but then they let Ruth Bader Ginsburg stay on the Supreme Court. They always cut deals in the Senate to get Republicans picks on the federal. And that's the one thing we were told. If you don't like anything else about the Democrats, you've got to vote for them to support the Supreme Court, and you can support Roe v. Wade. What did Obama do in 2009? After campaigning, after saying he would pass legislation to codify Roe, a few months into office, he says, that's not my highest priority. It wasn't his priority at all. So the women lost the right to choose because of the Democrats' corruption. So even where we see these differences, it's a vote getting scheme. It's a fundraising scheme. It wasn't anything about really. And then there were people. Nancy Pelosi a couple of years ago said, "Well, we're talking about abortion, maybe too much." I'm paraphrasing. It's not such a big issue anymore. I don't think they thought that Roe would be overturned, but that's another problem with it. Even the things that are that where we see these differences, we don't see them really stepping up and protecting the things and fighting for the things that they claim they will. As far as it's good you're going to have Mike Strode on, but I think that's very important also. I think people can become apathetic, can become disconnected when they don't see any change, when they don't see an effort to do something different. I think that's vital for people to say, I could work for a cooperative, or if I'm short of money, if I was in a co-op, maybe I could still provide my needs. Any number of things. So I think that's an example of something that we need to build on and need more of, because there's nothing like seeing mobilization, to see people fighting for rent control, having a rent strike. I mean, any number of things that concretely can impact people's lives and make their lives better. So absolutely.
Folks, a reminder, you're watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the Redneck. I am talking to my dear friend and comrade, Margaret Kimberly of the Black Agenda Report. Margaret, I'm inspired to let you know that you've inspired Jackrabbit, our technical producer, to come on screen. So I'm going to bring Jackrabbit into the conversation. By way of introduction, I want to let you know I met Jackrabbit during Occupy Wall Street. Jack was one of the consistent voices and workers who was making that motion happen. He also got inspired, I know, by Bernie Sanders and put a lot of sweat equity into that campaign. So I'm going to bring you into this conversation, Jack, to see what you're thinking about what you're hearing so far.
Well, I just want to say thanks so much, Margaret, for being here with us today. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting me come on. One of the things that I was thinking about when y'all were talking is, well, I actually, in responding to the comment from David, it's like unintended consequences is one of the things that comes to my mind, because I know that there is this kind of sense that, oh, well, as bad as the Democrats are, they're better than the Republicans in a certain sense. But what comes up in my mind is this idea of unintended consequences. You see where people are just so sure that, like, the environment would just be a complete disaster with a Republican in charge, and yet we also know that it's a pretty safe bet that Biden has been responsible for the greatest release of greenhouse gases ever in human history, with the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, right? Okay, we don't talk about that. Nobody's ever talking about that, right? So here you have, in that situation, this kind of like, what's why I'm saying unintended consequences. You think, oh, okay, well, at least, he's not so bad about, like, working. He didn't put for example, the head of Exxon to be the Secretary of State, for example. So you think, oh, he's not so bad, but no, he's really terrible. Actually, it's really amazingly bad for the planet in a way that you wouldn't have expected or anticipated. And simultaneously, as David said before, the Democratic Party is where revolutionaries go to die, right? So it's like, I love that y'all were talking about alternative, working outside of the two-party system and how important that is. I think that what I want to put to you, Margaret, is kind of like, what does it look like within that context? Why do we care that Dr. West is joining the race? How does that work in this world of, like, that has accepted the duopoly as the default?
Well, if with a strong candidate like West, people will stop accepting the duopoly as a default, which is a very good thing. People will see that there are new possibilities, and start thinking through these things instead of just accepting. You got to vote for the Democrats. There's nothing else you can do. For people to say, well, wait a second, I see how this really works. And even to be, and we've been saying that you don't have to, it's not necessary to not be involved in electoral politics at all. But when you are, to be involved in a way where you make demands. Well, I'm not going to vote for you unless you do X. This is my issue. I need you to take care of that. All of those things are very important. But I think a person like West, who has so much legitimacy, who has for many years, I think helps to move people along in that direction. That the voting for outside of the duopoly is not going to be some outlandish thing. That it's someone who is trusted, who is respected. I think he can really move the needle there. But I wanted to touch on something you mentioned about the environment. Biden has more drilling on federal lands than Trump did. So you get a Republican president, they'll come in and they'll say, I'm getting out of the climate agreement. And the Democrat will get in the climate agreement, although the climate agreements aren't worth much. That's a whole other story. We could do a whole segment on that. No, for example, it doesn't include pollution caused by the military. The U.S. military is one of the biggest polluters in the world. So unless the president is going to cut the military budget, any talk of being an environmentalist is false. So I think we can look at the things that have actually happened, and I think while it's true that there are differences, they become smaller and smaller because of this. I'm just going to call it corruption on the part of that wing of the duopoly, who rule with fear. That's I'm just thinking about that. They rule with fear. They make people afraid. They don't even go through the motions of saying, like old school politics. It was, well, you want this, or no, I can't do A. Maybe I can do B. Maybe there's some kind of compromise. Maybe something, but now it's just fear. You have to vote for us. If you don't vote for us, the earth will keep getting hotter. Well, guess what? It still is. But Obama bragged about how much he increased fossil fuel production. And there are states where women can't get abortions at all. So, yes, there are differences, but unless this duopoly is broken, and I believe it has to be broken, and this rule by fear, that's what's going to save us. We have to save ourselves, and I think we save ourselves by looking outside of the duopoly. I think it's an absolute necessity for humanity.
And I thank you so much for that, because like I completely agree. Like the history of systemic social change in this country, it's actually easy to describe the recipe. It's really hard to do, but it's easy to describe. And that is, you have to have a broad base mass movement of people who are politically educated and have clarity about what they're doing. So you need a mass movement. That mass movement has to be conscious and collectivized and moving on the same idea. Then you have to have an electoral arm of that movement that is working at the ballot box, right? So, like, that is a very easy thing to describe, but it's really hard to do all of these things, especially because you have a corporatized media system, because you have a corporatized education system, because the duopoly and the predatory class have created this narrative that constantly are bombarding us. And I'll tell you, Margaret, sometimes I think, it depends on what side of the bed I wake up on, right? Because some days I'm like, oh my God, we'll never win. Like, look at the billions of dollars that is spent daily on inoculating and indoctrinating and so forth. We'll never win. But sometimes I wake up on the different side of the bed and I say, there's no way that ultimately we won't prevail, because it takes them billions of dollars to prop up this corrupt system, because it takes billions of dollars to try to keep us separated. And the more we talk to each other, the more power we feel we have.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned mass movements. One of the things that makes me so angry, especially about the black misleaders that Bruce Dixon labeled, that they fetishize the civil rights movement, the liberation movement of the '60s and early '70s. But the thing everybody forgets is that was led by the people. It was the demands of the people that brought about change. People who could not vote got voting rights for the whole country. And people made demands. They made demands they knew the system did not want to meet. They made them anyway.
And Margaret, let's not forget, to whom did Martin Luther King Jr. address the letter from a Birmingham jail?
He addressed moderate.
it to the moderates. He addressed it to white moderates and other black leaders who were telling him, slow down, you'll get us in trouble. Like, it was literally to white moderates and other black leaders who were telling him to calm his rhetoric.
Can I ask you, this goes to both or either of you, when it seems like every time that there's a progressive electoral, like somebody who's jumping into the ring at a national level in the electoral system, that there is this idea that there needs to be a movement, or there's a movement behind them, right? I mean, I think that, You know, we saw with Obama, there was what was it called? I'm sorry, I forget now. There was a name for it, right? Like the grassroots movement. It
I
was
can't remember.
for America or whatever. As soon as he got elected, he dissolved it, right? And
Sure.
I think it was the same with like Kucinich. Didn't he have some kind of like a organization backing him?
It was
Democracy
for
for America,
Obama, it
right?
was Organizing for America. For Bernie Sanders, it was Our Revolution. For Jerry Brown, it was We the People. For Howard Dean, it was Democracy for America. For God's sakes, like this is so like predictable. The whole idea is always, oh, I know what let's do. Let's work within the Democratic Party to build up a movement and shift the party to the left. And that has historically been the call. That's the sheepdogging, right? And it doesn't work. It is literally like progressive. The Democratic Party's presidential primary is where progressive politics goes to die because all that energy, all that excitement, all that enthusiasm, it's ultimately put back into the Democratic Party leadership, neoliberals who are literally creating the conditions by which the Republican fascists are taking power. Like at the end of the day, that is it is a box canyon. It's a trap. And like a box canyon, you can move. Oh my gosh, look, but you hit a wall and the wall is impregnable. There is no way to break out of that. That's how I've addressed it. And I want to say clearly and unequivocally, I understand that there are people who feel like they have to stay within the Democratic Party trap. I'm not going to fuss at them. I'm going to say, look, if that's where you are, that's where you are. I'm looking for ways that I can work with you. So if you want to work with me on universal basic income, worker-owned cooperatives, public banking, proportional representation, ranked choice voting, I've got a menu of things that I work on that I think that people can work on outside of electoral politics. But when it comes to electoral politics, I have clarity that we need to build a people's party that is not beholden to corporate America. And even if you're going to be a Democrat, I've got this question. If you're going to run for office, will you make a pledge that you will not seek or accept corporate money? Because that question will wash out 98% of every Democratic Party candidate.
Well, you're right, but now we have people who say I don't take corporate money, and then they vote the same way. So they may actually, not accept corporate money, but it's such a scam and a sham that. And this is the thing that's so insidious about it. It really makes me so angry. That means they know what the people want. If you're campaigning saying, I'm not going to take corporate money, they know people don't trust corporations. That's why they say it. And so they know that's what people want. They know that's the right thing. But the party is completely subsumed within the bowels of corporate interests. And why does somebody like Nancy Pelosi, a multi-millionaire, why was she the Speaker of the House? Because she was a multi-millionaire. That's why. So, and then you get a new guy and there's a, young black person. He's like, well, listen, he had his job interview, so he's not going to represent anything differently than she did. But I have, in case you can't tell, I see very clearly that we have to get away from them, even as you point out, we want to engage people who may not be there yet. And I think you can also engage those people by doing something ourselves, and not by being overly critical of them.
Yeah, it seems to me like the key point is to be able to have something that's happening substantial, that's tangible outside of the electoral process. Because one of the things that I think totally rightly pointed out, Margaret, and this is something that I just don't think people have internalized enough. Is that politicians politicians have always said just what they think people want to hear, and unfortunately, right, today's modern politician, says what the left wants to hear. And people think, oh wow, oh they're saying this thing and it sounds very leftish, that's really hopeful. It's like, no, it's not. Look at Kamala Harris, who was like senator in California, right, the most liberal state in the country. And we know she says whatever she has to say. So she'll say something like, oh well, I've signed on to Medicare for all. Do you think she actually gives a goddamn about that? Oh no, I'll guarantee you she does not. But she knows that the people she thinks will vote for her, those are the people that she's appealing to. And so that's why I think, like, regardless if you're Green, Democrat, Republican, regardless, right, we need to be able to have people who have lost hope and lost faith, right, because no matter who says what they say, whether it's Bernie or even Dr. West. I mean, like, I listen, you don't know me, I love Dr. West. I think he's amazing and I'm grateful for what he's doing, but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter, is what I'm trying to get at here, is that we need to be able to give the hope. I think this is what I'm saying, is that I think that the hope that people have has to come from outside. And what I'm excited about with Redneck Gone Green is I feel that, David is hoping to bring people on to talk about like real world tangible things that people who are looking for that hope can actually take home with them, to be able to take the steps to make the world that we want to see happen.
Thank you so much, Jack. And we're going to have to close out because we're coming to the top of the hour. I want to say a couple of things really quickly before we turn it over to Margaret for her last words. Number one, let's remember that Barack Obama inspired people with rhetoric, right? Like, I think your point is very astute, Jack, and that is remember whenever he first ran in the primaries, the first go around, like nobody thought that a black politician had a chance in Iowa or New Hampshire, right? Like literally, it was the messaging that he used around hope and change that inspired a whole bunch of people. The problem was he didn't mean it, right? That was the problem. But the rhetoric of the left wins. And it is, look at every polling data and you'll see our policy proposals are hugely popular. They're majoritarian issues, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that we're going to have to navigate as we think about electoral politics. The other point that I want to make is, and I think this is super important, and that is that at the end of the day, ordinary people are going to have to be the ones to do this. Yes, Cornel West and Dr. West is an inspiring visionary person, and I'm not going to get invited on to Anderson Cooper. Cornel West will, right? Yeah. So we need people like Dr. Cornel West to run for office in order to rally folks. But it's up to organizers like me, like Jack, like Margaret, and you. And by you, I mean whoever is looking at me on this live stream or YouTube, or whoever is listening to my voice on the podcast. Ordinary people, whoever occupies the seat in which you are sitting, it's your job to organize your community to build the peaceful, just, democratic society that we want to live and play in. I'm going to conclude by saying this. At Redneck Gone Green, we're getting larger, stronger, and better organized. I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe, share this so that we can bust this algorithm. Next week, we're going to be joined by Mike Strode of the Cola Nut Collaborative. He'll be coming on to talk about the work that he does with time banking. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Margaret, for the final words for this week's show.
Well, thank you both. Thank you so much, David and Jack Rabbit. It's been a pleasure being with you both. And I just want to reiterate, you may not understand how it works, but you've got to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because that really does help quite a lot. Progressive voices can be censored on these platforms, so it's very important that you support Redneck Gone Green and other channels like it. What did Jesse Jackson always say? Keep hope alive. And I know what you mean about having the optimistic day and the pessimistic day, but I think we do have to have faith in ourselves, faith in the people, and know our history, and there's always been the people who bring about change. And I think really understanding that, really believing that is very empowering. And then you can fight off the propaganda and the fear and the indoctrination. So I am keeping hope alive, and thank you both so much.
Can't stop, won't stop.
There
Peace,
you
y'all.
go.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.